I was 19 when I learned what hell really looks like. It's not fire and brimstone, it's frozen. Chosin Reservoir, North Korea, December 1950. The thermometer read 40 below zero, but the wind made it feel like death itself was breathing down our necks. 30,000 United Nations troops surrounded by 120,000 Chinese forces who materialized out of the mountains like ghosts. We called it the frozen Chosin. Those who survived called it a miracle. My name is Marcus Stone. Private first class back then, barely old enough to vote, but old enough to die for my country. The 1st Marine Division had pushed too far north, chasing what Command thought were scattered remnants of a beaten enemy. Command was wrong. The Chinese weren't scattered. They were patient. And when winter came, they struck with the fury of an avalanche. The cold killed more men than bullets those first few nights. Morphine syrettes froze solid in our medical kits. Plasma bottles shattered. Weapons seized up because the lubricants turned to paste. Men's breath crystallized before it hit the ground, and the wounded froze in whatever position they fell. I watched a Marine reach for his rifle and watched his fingers snap off like icicles when he tried to grip it. My squad held a position on the east side of the reservoir dug into frozen earth that fought every strike of our entrenching tools. We'd been there 3 days when they hit us, not at dawn, like the training manual said, at 3 in the morning when exhaustion made men sloppy and the darkness absolute. Bugles blared from the ridgeline. Then came the grenades rolling down the slope like bowling balls, and behind them a wave of Chinese infantry that seemed to have no end. Corporal Jenkins died in the first 30 seconds. The kid from Oklahoma who'd shown me pictures of his girlfriend just that afternoon took a burst of rifle fire across his chest and went down without a sound. Martinez lasted longer, returning fire until a grenade landed in his foxhole. I can still hear the wet thump it made. We were 6. Then we were 4. Then we were 3, and I was bleeding from shrapnel in my left shoulder, and the Chinese kept coming. That's when Sergeant David Carter appeared. He came from the left flank, moving low and fast, despite carrying a BR that weighed 20 pounds. 25 years old with 3 years in service and a silver star he never talked about. His voice cut through the chaos like a blade. Get down. The grenade he threw cleared 15 feet and detonated among the advancing Chinese. He was already throwing the second before the first exploded. Then he was up firing the bar from his hip, walking forward into enemy fire like he was taking a stroll through Central Park. Follow me, Marines. We're not dying in this godforsaken ice. I don't remember standing. I remember the sound of my rifle firing, the smell of cordite mixing with the copper tang of blood. I remember David Carter moving like death incarnate, choosing targets with surgical precision, always moving forward. The Chinese line faltered. Then it broke. He led us in a fighting retreat, laying down, suppressing fire while pulling wounded men with him. My shoulder screamed, but his hand was iron on my collar, dragging me along when my legs wanted to quit. By the time we reached friendly lines, 17 men followed him. 17 out of a company that had started with 143. I watched him bandage the wounded, despite shrapnel embedded in his own leg. Watched him distribute the last of his water to men whose lips had cracked and bled from the cold. Watched him refuse morphine so the supply would last for those who needed it more. That night, shivering in a warming tent while a medic dug metal fragments from my shoulder, I made a promise. David Carter had given me my life. If I survived this war, I would spend the rest of my days honoring that gift. I would be the kind of man he was. I would protect those who needed protecting. I would stand when others fell. 37 years later, in a diner called Maple Street, in a Pennsylvania town called Millbrook, I would finally get the chance to repay that debt. The morning sun filtered through the windows of Maple Street Diner with the kind of lazy warmth that made a man forget winter was coming. 1987 had been good to Pennsylvania so far, an autumn painted in reds and golds that reminded old men like me why we'd fought for this country in the first place. The jukebox in the corner played Bruce Springsteen, Born in the USA. The irony wasn't lost on anyone who'd actually served. I sat in my usual corner booth, the one that gave me clear sight lines to both entrances and the kitchen. Old habits. Wolf Hayes sat across from me, nursing his 3rd cup of coffee and working on a crossword puzzle he'd never finish. We came here every Wednesday morning at 7 sharp. Had been doing it for 15 years, ever since we'd both retired and discovered that civilian life moved too slow for men who'd spent their youth running on adrenaline and fear. Wolf looked up from his puzzle pen, tapping against the newspaper. 7 letters, frozen battleground, chosen. I replied without looking at him. He filled it in, grunted his approval, went back to scanning for the next clue. The bell above the door chimed. A young woman rolled her wheelchair through the entrance, navigating the narrow space with practiced ease. Early 20s dark hair pulled back in a ponytail, wearing jeans and a flannel shirt that had seen better days. She positioned herself at a corner booth on the opposite side of the diner, the kind of spot that offered privacy while still allowing a view of the room. I knew her face, would have known it anywhere. Emma Carter, David's daughter. I hadn't seen her since the funeral 6 years ago, when she'd been 12 years old and crying so hard she couldn't breathe. Her mother, Eleanor, had kept her away from us after that, and I couldn't blame her. What did a group of broken-down bikers have to offer a grieving child except more pain? But Emma wasn't a child anymore. She had David's jawline, that same determined set to her mouth that said the world could throw whatever it wanted and she'd still be standing. Or in her case, sitting. The wheelchair was new. 2 years ago, Wolf had told me. Car accident on Route 16 during a rainstorm. Car went through the guardrail, rolled down an embankment. Broken back. Doctor said she'd never walk again. She pulled out a sketchbook, began drawing with the kind of focus that shut out the rest of the world. An old man 3 booths over bent over his eggs and toast. Her hand moved in confident strokes, capturing something in him that most people would never notice. The set of his shoulders, the way his fingers gripped his fork like he wasn't sure it would stay in his hand. The loneliness that settled on a man when he ate breakfast alone. "You watching Carter's Kid again?" Marcus Wolf's voice held amusement, the kind that came from knowing a man for 4 decades and reading his thoughts before he spoke them. "Someone should. This town's gotten meaner. You're getting soft in your old age." "No, just paying old debts." The jukebox switched songs. The coffee smelled like morning and second chances. Emma Carter filled in the shading on her drawing, completely unaware that 2 old Marines sat 30 feet away, watching her back like sentries on a wall. The bell chimed again. This time the diner went quiet. Blake Morrison walked in like he owned the place, which in a way he did. His father Thomas owned half the commercial real estate in Millbrook, and the other half owed him favors. Blake brought 2 friends with him, both built like linebackers, both wearing the kind of smirks that said they'd never faced real consequences for anything in their lives. 19 years old. Same age I'd been at Chosin, but there the similarity ended. Blake Morrison had never known cold that could kill, had never watched friends die, had never learned that the world didn't give a damn about your plans or your pride. He spotted Emma Carter and his smirk widened. I felt Wolf tense beside me. My hand tightened on my coffee cup, the ceramic warm against calloused fingers that had held rifles in weather that would have killed these boys in an hour. Well, if it isn't the artist formerly known as Standing. Blake's voice carried across the diner with practiced cruelty. The breakfast crowd shifted in their seats, uncomfortable but unwilling to intervene. That was Millbrook in a nutshell. Good people who'd learned to look away when power flexed its muscles. Emma didn't look up from her drawing. That made Blake move closer, his friends following like pilot fish trailing a shark. "I'm talking to you, wheel girl." 3 males, late teens, athletic build but soft, no real combat training. Pack formation meant courage borrowed from numbers. The girl was a lone, vulnerable position, minimal escape routes. My mind ran the tactical assessment, automatically filing details for later use. How long we gonna watch Wolf's voice was quiet meant only for me. Until it's worth the arthritis to stand up. Emma finally lifted her head. Her eyes met Blake's without flinching, and I felt a surge of pride that wasn't quite my right to feel. David's blood ran true. "I'm trying to enjoy my breakfast, Blake. Don't you have something better to do?" Her voice carried the kind of calm that came from facing down bigger demons than a small-town bully. The wheelchair hadn't broken her. That much was clear. Blake's face darkened. He didn't like being dismissed, especially not by someone he saw as beneath him. His hand shot out, grabbed the edge of her sketchbook. "Let's see what we've got here." Emma yanked it back. "Don't touch my things, or what, you'll run away." His friends laughed on cue, the kind of hollow sound that made my teeth ache. Frank Sullivan emerged from behind the counter, 68 years old, and moving like he remembered what it meant to hold a line. Korean War, same as me. We'd never served together, but we recognized each other just the same. "I think the lady asked you to leave her alone." Frank's voice didn't rise, but it carried weight, the kind earned through decades of getting up every morning and doing the work regardless of who thanked you for it. A young man appeared from the kitchen, mid-20s, with a military haircut that hadn't quite grown out. Ryan Foster. He'd been working the diner for 6 months ever since he'd mustered out of the Rangers and come looking for David Carter's family. He'd found the diner instead, and Frank had given him a walk and a reason to stay. Ryan positioned himself between Blake and Emma, his stance carefully neutral, but his eyes tracking every movement. Good instincts. David had trained him well. "You new in town?" Blake turned his attention to Ryan, trying to reassert dominance through intimidation. "My father owns half of Millbrook, including this dump. Your father might own the building. But in here, everyone deserves respect." The words were simple, but they shifted something in the room. Blake's expression went from annoyed to genuinely angry. People didn't talk back to Morrison's son. Not if they wanted to keep working in this town. Blake turned back to Emma, and I saw his intention a split second before he moved. The way his weight shifted, the tightening of his shoulders. I'd seen that same tell on enemy soldiers right before they pulled a trigger. His hand came down hard on the edge of Emma's plate. Pancakes and syrup exploded across the checkered floor, the crash echoing through the sudden silence. Ceramic shards skittered under tables. Maple syrup spread in a sticky pool that caught the morning light. "Oops, guess you won't be eating those." Blake's voice held satisfaction, the petty cruelty of someone who'd never been punched in the mouth hard enough to learn humility. Emma stared at the mess at the breakfast she'd been saving, and something in her face shifted from restraint to resolve. She grabbed her water glass and threw its contents directly into Blake's face. The water caught him mid-smirk, drenching his designer shirt and his carefully styled hair. For a moment, the entire diner held its breath. Then Blake's hand shot out and grabbed the handles of Emma's wheelchair, jerking it backward hard enough that she nearly fell. I was standing before I realized I'd moved. My knee protested arthritis that came from too many years sleeping on frozen ground, but I ignored it. Wolf stood too, his chair scraping against the linoleum. "That's enough." My voice cut across the room, carrying the command tone I'd learned in boot camp and perfected across 2 wars. Blake's head snapped toward me, his hand still on Emma's wheelchair. Frank had emerged fully from behind the counter now, a large knife in his hand. Not threatening, just present. Ryan had shifted his stance weight on the balls of his feet, ready to move. Blake looked at the old man standing 15 feet away, at the diner owner, with his knife, at the young veteran blocking his path to the door. His friends had already started backing toward the exit, their borrowed courage evaporating in the face of men who'd actually seen violence and weren't impressed by posturing. "Who the hell are you?" "Someone who's forgotten more about fighting than you'll ever learn, son." I took a step forward. My body might have been 72 years old, but I still knew how to move, how to make every motion count. Blake's hand slipped off the wheelchair. "You're making a mistake, old man," my father. "Your father and I have history, bad history, and unless you want me to share it with everyone in this room, I suggest you leave, now." Something in my voice must have conveyed that I wasn't bluffing. Blake's face went through several expressions, settling on forced bravado. "This isn't over." He and his friends retreated toward the door, trying to salvage dignity from defeat. The bell chimed as they left. The diner slowly exhaled, conversations resuming in quiet murmurs. I walked over to Emma Carter Wolf, a step behind me. Up close, I could see the sketch she'd been working on. The old man eating breakfast, rendered in quick, confident lines that captured something essential about loneliness and routine and the quiet dignity of surviving another day. "Miss Carter, my name is Marcus Stone. I served with your father in Korea." Her eyes, David's eyes, studied my face with an intensity that made me feel like I was being cataloged and filed for future reference. "I don't remember you. You were 12 at the funeral, and your mother kept you away from us after." Can't say I blame her. Emma's gaze shifted to Wolf, then to Frank and Ryan, assessing each of us in turn. "Looking for something? Threat or ally, I couldn't tell. What do you want?" "Nothing, just happened to be having breakfast when that boy decided to make trouble." But the words felt hollow even as I said them. I'd been watching Emma Carter every Wednesday for 6 months, ever since I'd first spotted her coming to the diner. Watching from a distance, making sure she was safe, telling myself it was just paying respect to David's memory. But that was only part of the truth. The other part was guilt. The kind that ate at a man over decades, that whispered in the quiet moments, That maybe I could have done more, should have seen the signs, should have protected David the way he'd protected me at Chosin. Wolf pulled out his phone, one of those new Motorola bricks that cost more than my first motorcycle. He stepped outside and I knew without asking what call he was making. Code Blue. The signal we'd established years ago for when one of our own needed help. Emma was still watching me, waiting for something. The truth, maybe. An explanation. But I didn't have words for what I owed her father for the debt that had shaped 37 years of my life. So I just stood there, an old Marine, trying to figure out how to tell a girl in a wheelchair that her father had saved my life in a frozen hell and that I'd failed to save his. Frank brought over a fresh plate of pancakes, set them in front of Emma without comment. Ryan started cleaning up the mess on the floor. The diner returned to its rhythm, breakfast orders, called out coffee, poured the jukebox, moving to the next song. Outside in the distance, I heard the first rumble of thunder. Except it wasn't thunder. It was the sound of 15 Harley-Davidson motorcycles, vintage iron, kept in pristine condition by men who understood that some things were worth maintaining no matter the cost. Wolf stepped back inside, a grim smile on his face. Perfect timing. The rumble grew louder, approaching from the east where the old steel mill used to stand, where our clubhouse occupied a converted warehouse that had once stored the raw materials of American industry. Now it stored something more valuable. Brotherhood. Purpose. The remnants of men who'd fought in forgotten wars and refused to be forgotten themselves. Blake Morrison's Camaro was still visible through the window, parked across the street. He hadn't left, just regrouped, probably calling his father or working up the courage to come back with reinforcements. But he was about to learn an important lesson about the difference between money and power, between inheritance and earning your place. The first motorcycle pulled into the parking lot, a 1965 Harley-Davidson Panhead cherry red with chrome that caught the sunlight like a mirror. Major Paul Reynolds dismounted with the careful precision of a 70-year-old who'd spent too many years jumping out of perfectly good airplanes. Air Force, Korea, and Vietnam, 3 Purple Hearts, and a distinguished Flying Cross he kept in a drawer, because the medals didn't matter as much as the men who'd earned them alongside him. Then came the others, one after another, forming a perfect line across the front of the diner. Sergeant Luis Williams on a knucklehead that had been his father's before him. Corporal Diego Martinez on a soft tail he'd built from parts over 3 years. Dr. Elena Rivera on a lowrider that she'd bought after her husband died, and her children told her she was too old to be reckless. 15 motorcycles, 15 veterans, each one wearing a leather jacket with the same patch emblazoned on the back. An eagle clutching a motorcycle chain, wings spread against the American flag, the words "Iron Veterans" arcing above and below. I watched Emma's face as she took in the sight, confusion giving way to curiosity, giving way to something that might have been recognition. She'd seen these jackets before, even if she didn't remember. David had worn his to her christening, to her first birthday, to every major event in her young life, until Eleanor had asked him to choose between his family and his brothers, and he'd chosen his family without hesitation. But he'd never formally resigned from the Iron Veterans. Once you were in for life. Your brothers didn't abandon you just because you hung up your jacket. They watched from a distance, ready to ride when called, waiting for the day when old debts came due. That day was today. The veterans dismounted, moving with the synchronized efficiency of men who'd spent decades working as a unit. No wasted motion, no unnecessary chatter. They lined up outside the diner, not blocking the entrance, but making their presence unmistakable. Wolf held the door as I walked out, my knee protesting but my back straight. 72 years old and still able to put one foot in front of the other. That counted for something. Blake Morrison stood by his Camaro phone pressed to his ear, eyes wide as he took in the gathering of old men on motorcycles. He lowered the phone slowly, some instinct telling him that whoever he was calling wouldn't arrive in time to matter. I walked across the parking lot, Wolf on my left, Ryan Foster materializing on my right. The morning sun felt warm on my face. My shadow stretched long across the pavement. Blake tried to reassemble his bravado. "You guys some kind of senior citizen biker gang?" Several of the veterans smiled at that, the kind of smile that made smart people nervous. Something like that, though we prefer the term brotherhood. I stopped 10 feet from Blake, close enough to talk, far enough to give him space to make a choice. "Your father know you're out here harassing disabled girls." She threw water at me. "After you destroyed her breakfast, after you grabbed her wheelchair, after you called her names." I paused, let that sink in. See, we've been watching. That's what we do. Watch out for people who can't always watch out for themselves. Blake's friends had gotten out of the car, but they stayed close to it, clearly reconsidering their life choices. Blake himself was trying to figure out if he was in real danger or just being intimidated by harmless old men. I decided to help him understand. My name is Marcus Stone. I served with David Carter in Korea. Chosen Reservoir, December 1950. Your father and I have history too. Different kind of history. Blake's expression shifted to uncertainty. What are you talking about? I'm talking about 1969. I was first lieutenant back from my second tour. Your father was second lieutenant, fresh out of officer candidate school. Thought he was God's gift to the military. Lasted 11 months before they court-martialed him. You're lying. I pulled out my wallet, extracted a folded piece of paper I'd carried for 18 years. The paper was yellowed, the creases worn soft, but the words remained clear. Discharge papers. Dishonorable. The name Thomas James Morrison typed in neat military font. Your father was caught falsifying supply requisitions, selling military equipment on the black market, pocketing the cash. I testified against him at his court-martial. So did 6 other officers. He got a dishonorable discharge and was lucky not to see prison time. I folded the paper, returned it to my wallet. Blake's face had gone pale. He's been lying about his service ever since. Tells people he was honorably discharged due to injury. Built his political career on stolen valor. Built his business on the same kind of fraud he started in the military. Your father is a thief and a liar, and he's been getting away with it for too damn long. The parking lot had gone quiet. Even the traffic on the main road seemed to have paused. Blake looked at the discharge papers, at me, at the line of veterans watching with expressions that said they'd heard this story before and believed every word. That's when the Lincoln Town car pulled into the lot. Black, expensive. License plate that read, Mayor 1. Thomas Morrison emerged like he was stepping onto a stage, all practiced charm and political smile. The smile faltered when he saw me. Marcus, it's been a long time. Not long enough, Thomas. He took in the motorcycles, the veterans, his son standing pale and shaken between us. His politician's brain started working overtime, calculating angles and damage control. What's going on here? I got a call about some kind of disturbance. Your son was harassing a young woman. We intervened. Now he's learning some uncomfortable truths about his father. Thomas's smile vanished entirely. Blake waited in the car. But Dad, now the command voice worked on his son, if nothing else. Blake retreated to the Camaro, confusion and fear written across his face. Thomas turned his attention to me, and I saw the man beneath the politician. The officer who'd sold out his brothers for profit. The man who'd lied for so long, he probably believed his own story. I don't know what you told my son, but spreading malicious lies about my service record, I've got your discharge papers, Thomas. The real ones. Not the honorable discharge you've been showing people for 20 years. His jaw tightened. You're making a serious mistake. No, David Carter made a mistake. He trusted you. He thought you'd change that. Maybe you'd found some integrity after your discharge. But you didn't change. You just got better at hiding who you really are. Thomas glanced around, aware that we had an audience. Several diner patrons had come outside. Frank stood in the doorway, arms crossed. Emma Carter sat visible through the window, watching everything. I don't know what you think, you know. I know you've been cutting corners on municipal construction projects. Substandard materials, bribed inspectors, falsified safety reports. Same game you played in the military, just bigger stakes. I know David Carter was investigating you 6 years ago, and I know he died in a convenient accident 2 weeks before he was scheduled to meet with state transportation authorities. Thomas's face went from red to white. You can't prove any of that. Maybe not, but we've been gathering evidence for 6 years. Documents, financial records, witness statements, and now we have David's daughter as a witness to what your negligence cost her. I gestured toward the diner where Emma sat. Thomas looked, and I saw something flicker in his expression. Not quite guilt, but fear of consequences, which was close enough. We need to talk. Privately. I gestured toward the diner. Frank's office. 5 minutes. Thomas nodded curtly, turned to his son. Go home. I'll deal with this. Blake looked between us, clearly wanting answers, but not willing to challenge his father twice in one morning. The Camaro's engine roared to life. A moment later, he and his friends were gone. Thomas followed me into the diner past Emma Carter, who watched him with eyes that saw more than he wanted. Frank led us to his office and back, a small room that smelled like coffee and old newspapers. I closed the door behind us. The moment we were alone, Thomas's political mask slipped. The man underneath looked older, harder cornered. How much do you want? I don't want your money, Thomas. Everyone wants something. I want you to tell me the truth. About David Carter, about what really happened that night. Thomas moved to the small window, looked out at the alley behind the diner. When he spoke, his voice had lost its polish. David came to me in the summer of '81, said he had questions about some of my construction projects, about Route 16 in particular. I told him everything was above board, but he wouldn't let it go. Because you were lying, because you cut corners and people got hurt. Thomas turned to face me. Business is complicated. Sometimes you have to make compromises. Compromises. That's what you call using guardrail posts spaced 10 feet apart instead of 6, using anchors half the required depth, bribing inspectors to sign off on work that didn't meet specifications. The work was adequate. Emma Carter's car went through that guardrail, rolled down an embankment, broke her back. She'll never walk again because you wanted to save a few $1,000s on materials. Thomas's face tightened, but he didn't deny it. I never wanted anyone to get hurt, but they did. Emma did, and I think David did too. The words hung in the air between us. Thomas moved back to the window, his reflection ghostly in the dirty glass. David was going to meet with state investigators, had documentation, inspection reports, financial records, everything. I tried to convince him to drop it, told him he was ruining his life over nothing. He wasn't. He was trying to save lives, to stop you from hurting more people. Thomas's shoulders sagged. I swear I never meant for it to go that far. But it did, didn't it, Thomas? He turned to face me and I saw something in his eyes that confirmed what I'd suspected for 6 years. Not confession, but acknowledgement. The burden of knowledge too heavy to carry alone any longer. There's a man, Victor Kane, former contractor, does private security work. I know the type. I hired him to discourage David. Just talk to him. Make him understand the consequences of pursuing this investigation. That's all, just talk. And Thomas swallowed hard. I don't know what happened. Kane said he'd handle it. 2 days later, David's car went off the road in the rain. Police ruled it accidental. Bad weather, slick conditions, driver error. But you knew better. I didn't know anything for certain. Kane said he'd just talked to David, that David had seemed upset but unharmed. The accident happened 20 miles from where they met. Convenient timing. Life is full of coincidences, Marcus. Not in my experience. We stood there, 2 old men carrying decades of choices between us. Thomas had made his choices. Profit over people. Lies over truth. Covering up mistakes until they became crimes. And somewhere along the way, those choices had led to David Carter dying on a rainy road, his daughter crippled, and a town slowly rotting from corruption. You have 24 hours to turn yourself in to state authorities. Confess to the construction, fraud, the bribery, everything. Cooperate fully with their investigation. Or we go public with everything we have. Documents, testimony. Your son knows the truth about your discharge now. How long before everyone else learns? How long before the state starts looking at every project you've ever worked on? Every inspector you've ever paid off? Thomas's jaw worked, but no sound came out. He was calculating odds, running scenarios, trying to find the angle that let him survive this. But there wasn't one. I'd spent 6 years making sure of that. If I confess, I'm finished. Prison, bankruptcy, everything. You were finished the day you decided your profit mattered more than people's lives. This just makes it official. I opened the office door, held it for him. Thomas walked past me into the diner, his shoulders bent, his political posture gone. He looked like what he was, a scared man facing consequences he'd spent decades avoiding. Emma Carter watched him cross the room. Her eyes followed him all the way to the door, and I wondered what she saw. The man who'd killed her father, the man who'd destroyed her future, or just another bully, older and richer, but a bully just the same. Thomas paused at the door, looked back at me one last time. You always were self-righteous, Marcus. Even in the military. Always had to be the hero. No, I just learned from better men than you. Men who understood that leadership means taking care of your people, not using them for your own gain. He left without another word. The Lincoln pulled out of the lot, drove away toward whatever fate he'd choose. Turn himself in or run, confess or fight. It didn't matter much to me anymore. The truth was out. The wheels were in motion. Justice might be slow, but it was coming. I walked over to Emma's booth. She'd pushed her fresh pancakes aside, no longer hungry. Her sketchbook lay open in front of her, a new drawing taking shape. This one showed the parking lot, the motorcycles, the veterans. Me standing in front of Blake Morrison, my shadow long and dark across the pavement. Your father saved my life. Chosen Reservoir winner of 1950. 17 of us survived because of him. Emma looked up, her eyes searching my face for something. Truth, maybe. Or just connection to the father she'd lost too young. My mother never told me about any of this. The motorcycles, the brotherhood. She said he was just a regular soldier who came home and worked construction. He was. But he was also more than that. David Carter was the kind of man who made everyone around him better, made them braver, made them want to be worthy of his friendship. Why didn't he tell me about Chosen? About any of it, because home was where he healed from it. You were his piece, Emma, his reason to leave the war behind. Wolf appeared at my elbow. The others were dismounting now, filing into the diner. Major Reynolds with his flight jacket worn soft from decades. Sergeant Williams moving stiff from old injuries that ached in cold weather. Daria Elena Rivera shaking her head at the sight of Emma's wheelchair, already assessing mobility and independence factors with a physician's eye. They gathered around Emma's booth, these old warriors in leather and denim. Not threatening, just present, bearing witness. Your accident wasn't an accident, Emma. The guardrail that failed on Route 16 was improperly installed. Morrison Construction cut corners to save money. Your father discovered it. He was going to expose the fraud. Emma's hands tightened on her sketchbook. Are you saying my father was murdered? I'm saying he was investigating Thomas Morrison 2 weeks before he died. I'm saying Victor Kane is a name that appears in Morrison's financial records whenever problems need solving. I'm saying the timing is too convenient to be coincidence. Can you prove it? Not yet. But we're working on it, have been for 6 years. Emma looked around at the veterans surrounding her, 15 men and 1 woman, average age approaching 70, looking back at her with expressions that promised protection and vengeance in equal measure. What do you want from me? Your testimony? Your story? Put a human face to Morrison's crimes. Help us bring him to justice. I'm just a girl in a wheelchair. No, you're David Carter's daughter, and that means something in this town. To people who remember, that's your weapon. Emma studied her drawing, the motorcycles rendered in careful detail. Then she looked up, and I saw David's determination in her eyes, the same look he'd had when he led us out of that Chinese ambush. Not fearless, just resolved. I'll do it, but I want to know everything first. About my father, about you, about all of this. Fair enough? Come to our clubhouse this afternoon. We'll show you who your father really was, what we've been working on since the day they buried him. Emma nodded slowly. Ryan Foster stepping forward, his young face serious. I served under your father at Fort Benning, ma'am. I'd be honored to make sure you get there safely. The diner had returned to its breakfast rhythm, but something fundamental had shifted. Emma Carter wasn't alone anymore. She had brothers now, even if she didn't know it yet. David's brothers. Men who'd waited 6 years for the right moment to strike back at the corruption that had taken one of their own. Outside, the sun climbed higher in the Pennsylvania sky. The motorcycles gleamed in the parking lot, steel horses waiting for their riders. The iron veterans began filing out, mounting up engines, rumbling to life one by one, until the air thrummed with mechanical thunder. I helped Wolf to his feet, my niece screaming protest I ignored. Emma wheeled herself to the window, watching the formation take shape. Protection detail, honor guard, call it whatever you wanted. We were here now, and we weren't leaving until David Carter's daughter had justice, and Thomas Morrison had paid for his sins. Wolf's Harley roared, then Reynolds's, then Martinez's. One by one, the engines sang a chorus of defiance and promise. Emma's hand pressed against the window glass, her expression unreadable, but her shoulders straight. Welcome to the fight, I thought. Your father started it, but you're going to finish it, and God help anyone who stood in the way. The Iron Veterans Clubhouse sat on the eastern edge of Millbrook, where the old steel mill had once employed 3,000 men. The mill closed in '83, took half the town's economy with it, left behind rusted infrastructure and broken families. We'd bought the warehouse for taxes owed, converted it into something that mattered more than steel ever had. A place where men who'd given everything for their country could find brothers who understood. Ryan Foster drove Emma Carter's van, the one with the wheelchair lift her mother had saved 2 years to afford. Wolf and I rode flanking positions, our bikes close enough to intervene if needed, but far enough to give the girl space to process what she'd learned. Behind us, Major Reynolds led the remaining veterans in tight formation. We moved through Millbrook like a procession, drawing stares from people who'd learned to look away when power passed by. But we weren't power in the way Thomas Morrison wielded it. We were something older. Consequence arriving on iron horses. The warehouse came into view, brick facade weathered by decades of Pennsylvania winters. No sign marked it as ours beyond the eagle emblem painted above the entrance wings, spread across faded paint that had once been red, white, and blue. Ryan pulled to the curb. I dismounted, my knee protesting as it always did after a long ride, walked to the passenger door as Emma rolled down the window. This is it. Not much to look at from outside. Emma studied the building with an artist's eye, the way David used to assess terrain before committing his men. What's inside history? Brotherhood. The truth about who your father really was. She nodded slowly. Ryan activated the lift, positioned her wheelchair on the platform. The mechanical whir seemed too loud in the quiet street. Emma rolled forward as we entered, and I watched her face register the transformation between exterior and interior. The main room stretched 40 feet, exposed beams overhead, supporting a ceiling 20 feet high. Vintage motorcycles lined the west wall, each one positioned on a custom stand with a brass plaque beneath. Names, dates of service, wars fought. 2 of those plaques bore gold stars marking brothers who'd ridden their last mile home. The east wall belonged to photographs, hundreds of them chronicling the Iron Veterans from 1954 to present day. Black and white images from Korea, giving way to color shots from Vietnam, Lebanon, Grenada, Panama. Faces young and hard, then older and harder, then old, and somehow softer, as if surviving everything had finally earned them permission to feel again. Emma rolled closer to the photo wall, her chair navigating the space Wolf had deliberately kept clear for exactly this reason. We'd known someday David's daughter would come here. We'd prepared for it the way Marines prepared for everything, with patience and attention to detail. The first photograph that stopped her showed a group of young men in combat gear, Korea 1950. David Carter stood in the center, 19 years old, frost in his beard, 1,000-yard stare that said he'd seen things no teenager should witness. That's your father, 3 days after chosen. We just made it back to friendly lines. Lost 70% of the company, but those of us who survived did it because of him. Emma's finger traced the glass protecting the photo. He looked so young. We all were. Old enough to die for our country, but most of us couldn't legally buy a beer. Wolf appeared with coffee, 3 mugs balanced in hands that had once steadied .50 caliber machine guns. He set them on the central table, a massive piece of oak that had been a conference table at the steel mill before the bankruptcy auction. We'd bought it for $50 and refinished it ourselves, sanded away decades of corporate meetings to expose the grain beneath. Emma accepted the coffee, cradled it in both hands like she needed the warmth despite the mild evening. Her eyes kept returning to the photographs, hunting for more images of her father. There, 1967, after David's Vietnam tour. He stood with me and Wolf, all 3 of us wearing leather jackets that showed the wear of hard riding. David's face had changed from the Korea photo, harder around the eyes, smile that didn't quite reach them. The war had followed him home the way it followed all of us. He never talked about Vietnam, wouldn't even watch the news when Saigon fell. Most of us who were there try to forget. David was better at compartmentalizing than most. He put the war in a box, locked it away, focused on building a life with your mother. But the box leaked sometimes. I'd seen it in the quiet moments, the 1,000-yard stare returning when he thought no one was watching. The way his hand would drift to his hip where he'd once carried a sidearm. The nightmares he mentioned only once, after enough whiskey to drown his filters. Elena Rivera emerged from the back room carrying manila folders thick with documentation. She'd been our intelligence officer since the beginning, the one who could navigate bureaucracy and find the paper trails others tried to hide. 58 years old and sharper than most people half her age. Miss Carter, I'm Elena Rivera. I served as a combat nurse in Korea. Your father pulled me out of a field hospital when Chinese forces overran our position. Carried me 2 miles through enemy territory because I'd taken shrapnel in both legs and couldn't walk. Elena set the folders on the oak table, arranged them with military precision. Emma stared at the documentation, then at the assembled veterans who'd begun filtering into the room. Each one found a position, standing at ease, but ready, waiting for orders that would come. I wheeled Emma to the table, positioned her where she could see everything. These folders represent 6 years of work, every municipal project Morrison Construction completed since 1975. Every inspection report, every financial record we could obtain through official channels, and some that weren't quite so official. Emma opened the first folder. Route 16 construction project completed 1983. Engineering specifications called for guardrail posts every 6 feet 42 inches deep, specific grade steel. Inspection reports signed by Leonard Hutchins County Building Inspector. All approved, all supposedly up to code. Now here, I slid another folder across. These are the actual specifications. Posts every 10 feet, 30 inches deep. Lower grade steel that costs 40% less. Emma's hands trembled as she compared the documents. The forged inspection reports. The falsified engineering certifications. The financial records showing Morrison pocketed the difference. $18,000 saved on Route 16 alone, multiplied across 47 projects over 12 years. Your accident happened at mile marker 17. Here's the failure analysis. The photographs showed the guardrail posts that had failed, pulled from shallow, anchoring the bend in substandard steel that should have held. Emma's car had hit it doing 45 miles per hour in rain, exactly the conditions the guardrail was designed to prevent. Instead, it had folded like aluminum foil, sent her rolling down a 30-foot embankment into a drainage culvert. I could have died. You should have. The fact that you survived with only paralysis is a testament to luck and the rescue team that reached you in under 10 minutes. Emma closed her eyes. When she opened them, tears tracked down her face, but her voice remained steady. Show me my father's investigation. Wolf pulled out a different folder, this one thinner, but somehow heavier. David had started noticing irregularities in 1980, discrepancies between bid specifications and actual construction that didn't make sense unless someone was cutting corners. He'd begun documenting everything, building a case the way he'd been trained, methodically, thoroughly, leaving nothing to chance. The final entry was dated September 15, 1981. Meeting scheduled with Pennsylvania Department of Transportation, October 1st, 1981. Prepared to present evidence of systematic fraud in municipal construction projects. Will recommend full audit of Morrison Construction and criminal investigation. David Carter died September 29, 1981. Rainy night, lost control on a curved vehicle, left the roadway and struck a tree. State police ruled it accidental. Bad weather, driver error, no evidence of mechanical failure or foul play. But there was this. Wolf extracted a single sheet of financial record we'd obtained through channels I wouldn't discuss in mixed company. Payment to Victor Kane Security Consultant, $50,000, dated September 28, 1981. One day before David's accident. The notation in Morrison's ledger read simply, problem resolution per discussion. Emma's coffee had gone cold. She stared at the paper, at the implicit confession hidden in bookkeeping shorthand. My father was murdered. We can't prove it in court. Not yet. But we believe so, yes. The room had gone quiet. 15 veterans stood or sat watching Emma Carter process the truth we'd carried for 6 years. Waiting to see if David's daughter had inherited his steel spine or if the weight would break her. She straightened in her wheelchair, wiped her face with the back of her hand, looked up with eyes that burned. What do you need from me? Your testimony, your story, the human cost of Morrison's greed. Judges and juries respond to facts and figures, but they remember faces and names. You put a face to these crimes that transcends paperwork. I'll do it, whatever it takes. It won't be easy. Morrison's lawyers will attack your credibility, question your memory, imply you're bitter about your accident and looking for someone to blame. They'll make you relive that night over and over, pick apart every detail, try to break you on the stand. Then you'll need to teach me how not to break. The words hung in the air. I looked at Wolf, at Elena, at the veterans who'd survived wars and came home broken, but still standing. Emma Carter was asking to be forged in the same fire that had tempered us, asking to become something more than a victim. That would require a different kind of training. The memory hit without warning the way they always did. Korea, 1951, training camp south of the 38th parallel, where we'd been rotated after Chosin for rest and refit. Rest being relative when you're training replacements who'd be dead in 6 weeks if they didn't learn fast. I was 20 years old, newly promoted to corporal, watching Sergeant David Carter work with a kid who'd frozen during a live fire exercise. Private James Johnson, 18, from some Iowa farm town he'd never see again. The other sergeants wanted to wash him out, send him to a support unit where freezing under fire wouldn't get anyone killed. David had other ideas. He kept Johnson after training, hours working with him on the rifle range when everyone else had retreated to tents and card games. I stayed because David had saved my life at Chosin, and I figured I owed him the courtesy of watching his back. The fear doesn't make you weak, Private. Fear makes you human. David's voice carried across the empty range, patient, despite repetition. Johnson stood at the firing line, rifle shaking in his hands, unable to pull the trigger. But I freeze up. Can't move. Can't think. Just freeze. David moved beside him, not touching, but present. At Chosin, we were all afraid. Every single man. Some showed it different than others, but the fear was there. You weren't afraid. I was terrified. Thought I was going to die in that frozen hell. Thought the Chinese would overrun us, and that would be it. But you still fought. You saved all those men. David was quiet for a moment, choosing words carefully. I fought because my brothers needed me. Because if I froze, they died. Fear doesn't go away, Johnson. You just find something bigger than the fear. Like what? Like the man standing next to you who's just as scared but trusting you to do your job. Like knowing your brothers will stand for you, so you better damn well stand for them. Johnson's hand steadied slightly. David stepped back, gave him space. Now, 3 rounds, center mass. Don't think about the fear. Think about your brothers. Johnson fired. 3 shots tight, grouping all inside the kill zone. His face registered surprise, then something like pride. David clapped him on the shoulder, the first physical contact between them. Good shooting. Now do it again. They stayed on that range until Johnson could fire under pressure without freezing. I stayed watching, learning something I hadn't understood at Chosin. Leadership wasn't about being fearless. It was about teaching others they could function despite their fear. 3 months later, Johnson saved David's life during a Chinese ambush. Returned the favor with interest. He made it home from Korea, went back to that Iowa farm, raised 4 kids, and lived to be 73. I went to his funeral in '98. David's name was in his eulogy. I blinked back in the clubhouse with Emma Carter watching me with eyes too knowing for her age. You were somewhere else just then. Korea. Your father teaching a scared kid how to fight despite being afraid. Emma leaned forward. How? He gave him something bigger than his fear. Brothers worth fighting for. I stood my knee protesting, walked to a lock-in cabinet against the north wall. Inside hung 15 leather jackets, each one bearing the Iron Veterans patch, each one sized for a specific member. David's jacket occupied the center position, preserved exactly as he'd left it the last time he'd ridden with us. I lifted it from the hanger, carried it back to Emma. The leather was worn soft from years of wind and weather, broken in by a man who'd earned every crease and scuff mark. Your father left this here in 1975 when you were born. Said if anything happened to him, we should give it to whoever carried on his fight. Emma reached out, tentatively, touched the leather like it might evaporate. The patch showed its age, threads fading, but the eagle's still proud wings spread across the American flag. It'll be too big. You'll grow into it, not physically, but in the ways that matter. Ryan Foster stepped forward, the young ranger who'd served under David at Fort Benning. Ma'am, your father was my training instructor in 1983. Toughest man I ever met, but also the fairest. He saw something in me I didn't see in myself. What did he see? That I was worth the effort, that I could be more than I thought possible. He pushed me harder than anyone, but never asked me to do something he wouldn't do himself. Elena added her voice. David saved my life in Korea, but more than that, he showed me I belonged in this brotherhood even when others said a woman had no place among combat veterans. He stood up for me when it would have been easier to look away. Wolf moved beside my shoulder. Your daddy and I rode together for 30 years, watched each other's backs through 2 wars and everything that came after. Best friend I ever had. I miss him every day. Emma looked around at the veterans surrounding her 15 men and 1 woman who'd served in wars stretching back 7 decades. Old faces carrying young scars, bodies worn by time but spirits unbroken. Teach me to be like him. The words were simple, but they carried weight I recognized. The decision to step from civilian into warrior, to accept that some fights required sacrifice and pain, but were worth fighting anyway. David had made that choice at 18. Emma was making it at 19. First lesson, know your enemy. I pulled out another folder, this one containing everything we knew about Thomas Morrison. Military records, business dealings, political connections, financial statements that showed wealth built on fraud and maintained through intimidation. Morrison isn't just a corrupt politician. He's a predator who's been operating for 20 years. He has money-power connections throughout the state, law enforcement in his pocket, judges who owe him favors, media that looks the other way. Emma studied the file. What do I have? The truth. Your father's name. And us? That's not much against what he has. David had less at Chosen. 17 men against 10,000 Chinese. Sometimes you fight not because you can win, but because losing isn't acceptable. The phone on the wall rang, old rotary model that Wolf insisted on keeping because cell phones were for people who wanted to be found. Elena answered, listened, her face going tight. It's Rachel Carter. For Emma. Emma wheeled to the phone, took it with hands that had steadied since entering the clubhouse. Mom. I couldn't hear Rachel's words, but I watched Emma's expression shift from concern to fear to anger. Her knuckles went white on the receiver. Are you safe? Where are you now? More conversation. Emma's face cycling through emotions she was learning to control. Finally, she lowered the phone, looked at me with eyes that held fury and grief in equal measure. Sheriff Morris searched our house this afternoon, had a warrant claiming they were looking for stolen documents. After they left, my mother received a phone call, a man she didn't recognize. He told her I should drop this crusade or she might have an accident like my father. The room temperature seemed to drop. Every veteran present had heard similar threats before, knew what they meant. Escalation from legal intimidation to physical danger. Morrison was showing his hand, revealing how desperate he'd become. Where's your mother now? With Judge Wallace's family. He's the only judge in the county. Morrison doesn't control. I turned to Wolf. Send Williams and Martinez. Full protection detail. Bring Rachel here. On it. Wolf moved to the phone, started making calls. I returned my attention to Emma, who'd gone pale but held herself together through visible effort. This is my fault. I should have left it alone. Should have just accepted the accident and moved on. No, this is Morrison's fault. He made the choices that led here, cut corners that hurt people, killed your father to protect his secrets, threatened your mother because he's scared of what you represent. What do I represent? Consequence. For 20 years, he's operated without facing any. Now David's daughter is putting a face to his crimes, and he knows the game is ending. Ryan Foster moved to Emma's side. We won't let anything happen to you or your mother. That's a promise. Elena began organizing logistics with the efficiency of someone who'd coordinated field hospitals under fire. Safe house arrangements, rotation schedules for protection details, communication protocols. We'd done this before sheltered people who'd stood against corruption and needed temporary sanctuary until the system caught up. The front door opened. Everyone tensed until Blake Morrison stepped through, hands raised in surrender position, briefcase clutched in one hand. I need to talk to Emma Carter. It's important. The room bristled. Wolf's hand dropped to his belt. Ryan shifted to blocking position. Blake swallowed hard but held his ground. I have evidence. From my father's private files. Proof of everything you accused him of. Why would you betray your own father? Blake's face twisted. Because I found notes about David Carter's death. About payments to Victor Kane. About permanent problem resolution. My father had Emma's father murdered, and I can prove it. He opened the briefcase, pulled out folders and documents that spilled across the oak table. Route 16 specifications, falsified inspection reports, financial records showing payments to inspectors and officials, and there in Thomas Morrison's handwriting, the smoking gun. Notes about David Carter becoming a problem. About Victor Kane handling situations that required discretion. About problems that disappeared. The final document showed a payment schedule. 50,000 to Kane September 1981. Notation, DC, permanent resolution. Emma stared at the papers at the implicit confession laid bare in her father's killer's handwriting. When she looked up at Blake, her expression held calculation rather than anger. Why help us? Why betray your family? Blake collapsed into a chair, suddenly looking younger than his 19 years. Because this morning I saw who I was becoming. My father's son, a bully who hurts people weaker than him because he can. Because it feels good to have power over someone. He looked at Emma directly. I've been cruel to you since the accident, made jokes about your wheelchair, called you names, enjoyed making you feel small. And this morning when those old veterans showed up, I realized I was just like my father, using power to hurt people, taking pleasure in it. Blake's voice cracked. Then I read his files, found out what he did to your father, found out your accident was his fault. And I couldn't be that person anymore. Couldn't be Thomas Morrison's son. The room remained silent. Emma studied Blake with the same assessing gaze she'd used on everyone since arriving. Finally, she spoke. You took a beating protecting me. When did that happen? Blake looked confused. I haven't. Not yet, anyway. Then you will. If you're serious about helping us, about doing what's right, it'll cost you. Your father will come after you. Your friends will abandon you. People in this town will turn their backs because Morrison owns them. I know. And you're willing to pay that price, Blake nodded. I don't expect you to forgive me. Don't expect us to be friends. But I want to make this right. Want to help bring him to justice. Emma extended her hand. Blake stared at it for a moment before taking it. The handshake was brief, formal, an alliance built on necessity rather than trust. But it was a start. Wolf returned from his phone calls. Williams and Martinez are en route to Judge Wallace's house. Should have Rachel here within the hour. Good. Blake, you're staying here tonight. Protective custody in making sure you don't change your mind. I won't. We'll see. People's courage looks different in daylight after they have had time to think about consequences. Elena organized sleeping arrangements. The clubhouse had a back room with cots for veterans who'd had too much to drink or needed a place to stay when home became unbearable. Blake would sleep there under watch. Emma would take Elena's private room, the one with accessible facilities we'd installed when Elena started having mobility issues 3 years ago. Ryan volunteered for first watch on Emma's door. Wolf took Blake's room. The other veterans filtered out, heading home with promises to return at first light. Major Reynolds paused at the door. Marcus, you did good today. David would be proud. We haven't won yet. No, but we're closer than we've been in 6 years. After they left the clubhouse, settled into quiet, I poured myself 2 fingers of bourbon, sat at the oak table with Blake's evidence spread before me. Documentation that could bring down Thomas Morrison. Proof that would reopen David Carter's death investigation. Evidence that might finally deliver justice. Emma emerged from the back room, rolling quietly across the concrete floor. Couldn't sleep. Me neither. Old habit. Insomnia from Korea never quite went away. She positioned herself across from me, accepted the second glass I poured without asking permission. We sat in silence, 2 people connected by a dead man drinking to his memory. Tell me about Chosen, about how he saved you. So I did. Told her about the frozen reservoir and the Chinese ambush, about watching friends die and thinking I'd be next, about David Carter appearing like an avenging angel leading a counterattack that opened an escape route none of us thought existed. He wasn't fearless. I could see it in his eyes. The same fear we all felt. But he moved anyway, fought anyway, saved 17 men because that's who he was. Emma listened without interrupting, absorbing details about her father she'd never known. When I finished, she refilled both our glasses. Tomorrow we go public with this. Hold a press conference. Present everything to state authorities and media simultaneously. Tomorrow you become a target. Morrison will throw everything he has at discrediting you. His lawyers will tear you apart. Then teach me how to stand when they try to break me. I studied Emma Carter, 19 years old in a wheelchair, asking to be forged into a weapon against the man who'd destroyed her family. David's daughter, in truth, not just biology. Your father taught me that courage isn't absence of fear. It's doing what's right despite being afraid. He taught me that brotherhood means standing for people who can't always stand for themselves. Emma's eyes held steady on mine. Then stand with me tomorrow. All of you. Let Morrison see that he's not just fighting David Carter's daughter. He's fighting everyone who remembers what honor means. Outside, Millbrook slept beneath autumn stars. Thomas Morrison probably slept too confident his money and connections would protect him as they always had. He didn't know that 15 veterans and one paralyzed girl were preparing to burn his empire to ash. We'd spent 6 years building this case, gathering evidence, documenting crimes, waiting for the right moment. That moment had arrived with Emma Carter rolling into Maple Street Diner, drawing pictures and refusing to be intimidated. David, I thought your daughter is exactly like you, brave and stubborn and unwilling to quit. We'll finish what you started, get her justice and yours. Make Morrison pay for every life he's damaged. The bourbon burned going down, but it warmed something cold inside me. Emma finished her glass, set it down with finality. Tomorrow then, we end this. Tomorrow we start ending it. Justice moves slow, but it moves. And we've got time. Emma smiled, tired, but genuine. My father chose his brothers well. No, we chose each other. That's what brotherhood means. She rolled back to her room. I sat alone with the evidence and the memories, an old Marine keeping watch over David Carter's daughter, the way he'd once kept watch over me. The debt came full circle. The promise made at Chosin found its redemption in a Pennsylvania warehouse 3 decades later. Some debts transcend time. Some promises outlast the men who make them. David Carter had saved 17 lives in frozen Korea. Now his brothers would save his daughter, in a turn pull her from the wreckage Morrison created, give her the tools to fight back. Outside, I heard motorcycles approaching. Williams and Martinez returning with Rachel Carter. The pieces were moving into position. Tomorrow we'd strike, hit Morrison with everything we'd built, force the system to finally hold him accountable. But tonight we kept watch. Brothers in arms, David's brothers, Emma's brothers. The Iron veterans riding one last time into battle for a man who'd given us everything and asked nothing in return, except that we take care of his own. We would. On that I staked my life and my honor, whatever remained of either. The door opened. Rachel Carter entered, flanked by Williams and Martinez, her face pale but determined. She saw Emma emerge from the back room and cross the space in 3 strides, pulled her daughter into an embrace that spoke of fear and relief in equal measure. Behind them, dawn approached. The day that would change everything. The day Thomas Morrison's empire began its fall. We were ready. Dawn broke cold across Pennsylvania, the kind of October morning that promised frost by evening. I'd slept 3 hours in the chair beside the oak table, old Marine instinct waking me before full light. Rachel Carter occupied the couch, her daughter asleep in Elena's room, Blake Morrison under guard in the back. 15 veterans had filtered back in before sunrise, summoned by Wolf's calls, understanding, without explanation, that today required all hands. The television mounted above the motorcycle display flickered to life. Channel 7 News, Thomas Morrison's face filling the screen. Wolf stood by the remote, volume low enough not to wake the others, but loud enough for those already conscious. Morrison wore his best suit American flag pin on his lapel, standing before Millbrook Town Hall, with reporters gathered like suppliants before a king. The chyron read, "Mayor responds to fraud allegations." These accusations are not only false, but malicious. His voice carried practiced sincerity politicians polish, refined over 20 years. Morrison Construction has always maintained the highest standards of quality and safety. The suggestion that we would compromise public safety for profit is offensive and defamatory. A reporter off camera pressed him. Mayor Morrison, the Tribune article specifically mentions Route 16, where Sarah Mitchell, Emma Carter, I corrected automatically though the television couldn't hear me, was injured 2 years ago. Do you deny substandard materials were used? Morrison's expression shifted to sympathy, the mask he wore when political necessity demanded appearing human. That accident was a tragedy. My heart goes out to the Carter family, but the investigation at the time was thorough. Road conditions were not a factor. Miss Carter was driving too fast for conditions. Emma appeared in the doorway, hair uncombed, eyes puffy from too little sleep. She watched her father's killer lie to cameras, rewrite history to protect himself, blame her for an accident his greed had caused. That's not true. I was doing the speed limit. The police report confirmed it. He's counting on people not checking the report. Most won't. They'll remember his version because he has the platform. Morrison continued his performance. What concerns me most is the source of these accusations. A group of aging motorcycle enthusiasts with a personal vendetta against me, manipulating a vulnerable young woman for their own purposes. Wolf snorted. Vulnerable? He really doesn't know you at all, does he? Emma's hands tightened on her wheelchair armrest, but her voice remained steady. Let him underestimate me. Makes it easier when we prove he's lying. Blake emerged from the back room, escorted by Martinez, who'd drawn last watch. The kid looked rough, dark circles under his eyes, suggesting he'd slept even less than I had. He stopped when he saw Morrison on television, his father's face twisted in righteous indignation, selling lies with the ease of long practice. He's good at this. Blake's voice held something between admiration and disgust. Been watching him do it my whole life. Lie so smoothly you almost believe him yourself. Does he know you took the files? Not yet, but he will soon. Probably has people checking his office right now. The television showed Morrison fielding more questions, deflecting blame, promising investigations that would vindicate him playing the victim while casting us as aggressors. Standard playbook for men who'd never faced real consequences. Rachel Carter joined us accepting coffee Elena poured from a pot that had been brewing since 0500. She watched Morrison's performance with the expression of someone recognizing a snake she'd encountered before. He came to our house 3 times after David died, offered condolences, asked if we needed anything, all the while knowing he'd had my husband killed. Her voice didn't rise, but the fury beneath it ran deep as bedrock. I'd heard that tone in combat right before men did things they'd carry forever. Rage that transcended anger into something colder and more dangerous. We'll make him pay for it. Today. Morrison's press conference ended with promises to cooperate fully with any legitimate investigation, to open his records to proper authorities to prove his innocence beyond doubt. The reporters ate it up, asking softball questions, accepting his narrative because he was mayor and we were just old men on motorcycles. But we had something Morrison didn't. Documentation, witnesses, and his own son ready to testify against him. Blake, you're certain about this. Once you go on record, there's no walking it back. Blake met my eyes without flinching. My father is a murderer and a thief, I'm certain. Good, because in about 3 hours you're going to stand in front of cameras and state that for the record. Media will eat you alive. People will call you traitor Judas worse. Your life in this town is over. I know, and you're willing to pay that price. Someone has to. Might as well be the person who's benefited from his crimes my whole life. The convoy formed at 0800. Emma Blake, Rachel and Ashley Morgan, who'd arrived at dawn with camera crew and questions. Ryan Foster would drive the van. Wolf and I would flank on motorcycles. The remaining veterans would follow in tight formation, protection detail, and honor guard combined. But first, breakfast. Elena had cooked enough eggs and bacon to feed a platoon-old military habit of making sure her people ate before operations. We gathered around the oak table, veterans and civilians, mixing passing plates and coffee, the ritual of breaking bread before battle. Emma pushed eggs around her plate without eating. Blake stared at his food like it might attack him. Rachel ate mechanically fuel rather than pleasure. Only the veterans showed appetite, men who'd learned in war that you ate when food was available because you never knew when the next meal would come. I sat beside Emma, kept my voice low enough for privacy. You don't have to do this. We have enough evidence without your testimony. Could pursue this through official channels, keep you out of the spotlight. But it wouldn't be the same. You said I put a face to the crimes, make them real for people. That's what I need to do. It'll hurt. They'll make you relive the accident, every detail. The rain, the failed guardrail, the car rolling. The moment you realized you couldn't move your legs. I relive it every night anyway. Might as well make it count for something. David would be proud of you. Emma finally met my eyes. Did you ever want to quit at Chosen when things looked worst? Did you ever just want to give up? The question pulled me back 37 years to frozen hell and Chinese bugles and the certainty of death. I'd wanted to quit every minute of every hour for 5 days. Wanted to curl up in my foxhole and let the cold take me, end the fear and pain and exhaustion. But I hadn't. None of us had. because David Carter kept moving forward and we'd have been damned before we quit while he still fought. Every man there wanted to quit. The difference between surviving and dying was finding something bigger than the fear. For me, it was watching your father refuse to quit. Figuring if he could keep going, I could too. Emma nodded, slowly processing this. What's bigger than my fear? That's something you have to find yourself. But I'll tell you what I see. I see David Carter's daughter refusing to let his killer escape justice. I see a young woman teaching this town that wheelchairs don't define strength. I see someone making sure her father's death meant something. Is that enough? It was enough for your father. It's enough for me. The food disappeared. Plates cleared, equipment checked with military thoroughness. Ashley Morgan reviewed her questions, making sure nothing would blindside Emma during the press conference. Blake went over his testimony one final time, voice shaking on certain passages, but holding firm when it mattered. At 09:30, the phone rang. Elena answered, listened at her face going hard. She covered the mouthpiece. Pennsylvania State Police. They're sending investigators to Morrison Construction headquarters this morning. Want to coordinate with us on timing. I took the phone, identified myself, outlined our press conference schedule. The detective on the other end sounded skeptical, but interested, promised to have people in place when we went public. Official channels moving at official speed, too slow to stop Morrison if he decided to run, but fast enough to matter once the story broke. We disconnected. Elena checked her watch. If we're doing this, we need to move. Press conference scheduled for 1100 at the Tribune offices in Harrisburg. That's 90 minutes to get there and set up. Mount up. The veterans moved with practiced efficiency, leather jackets, donned helmets, secured motorcycles fired to life one by one, until the warehouse thrummed with mechanical thunder. Emma wheeled to the van where Ryan stood ready. She paused, looked back at the assembled riders, these old warriors preparing for one final mission. Thank you, all of you, for my father, for me. Major Reynolds spoke for everyone. We're Iron veterans, we take care of our own. Always have, always will. The convoy rolled out at 09:45, 15 motorcycles surrounding the van, moving through Millbrook like a military escort. People on the sidewalk stopped to watch, some waving, others turning away. Everyone understanding that something significant was happening, even if they didn't know what. We took Route 16, the road that had broken Emma's back, past mile marker 17 where the failed guardrail had been replaced 2 years ago, with materials that met specifications. Too late for Emma. Too late for the 3 other people who'd been injured on Morrison's substandard construction. But we passed it anyway, marking the ground where everything had changed. The road climbed into hill country. Autumn colors brilliant against gray sky. Wolf rode my left flank, his Harley running smooth as silk despite being 50 years old. Behind us, the formation held tight, veterans maintaining distance and position without signals. Old skills automatic as breathing. I thought about Chosin, about leading men through frozen mountains with enemy behind and ahead and on all sides. About the weight of responsibility, knowing your decisions meant life or death for brothers who'd put their trust in you. This felt similar, shepherding Emma and Blake toward a confrontation that could end their lives as they knew them. Justice demanded sacrifice. Always had. Always would. The radio on my belt crackled, Ryan's voice tight with urgency. Marcus, we've got a tail. Black SUV, 3 vehicles back, been following since we left Millbrook. Copy. Everyone stay tight. Could be nothing. Could be Victor Kane. The name hung in the air between us, unspoken but understood. Morrison's fixer, the man who made problems disappear. If Thomas knew about Blake's betrayal, if he understood the threat we posed, he'd call in Kane to resolve it. $50,000 bought a lot of resolution. I keyed the radio. Wolf, you seeing this? Got it. Want me to drop back? Get a plate number, negative. Stay in formation. Reynolds Martinez, fall back to rear guard position. Keep eyes on that SUV, roger. The formation shifted, 2 veterans peeling off to ride behind the van, putting themselves between our people and whatever threat the SUV represented. My hand dropped to the knife clipped inside my jacket. Not much against firearms, but better than nothing. The road climbed higher trees, pressing close on both sides, perfect ambush terrain. Emma's voice crackled over the radio. Ryan says there's trouble, possible tail. Nothing confirmed. Stay calm, I'm calm. Just want to know if I should be scared. Fear is useful, keeps you alert. Panic is the enemy. The SUV maintained distance, neither closing nor dropping back. Professional surveillance or just paranoid civilians? Hard to tell. We crested the hill, began the descent toward the valley where Harrisburg sprawled. The SUV followed. Then it accelerated. Contact, Reynolds' voice cut across the radio. SUV is moving up 3 vehicles now, flanking the first SUV rammed into Martinez's bike from the side. Metal screamed. Martinez went down hard, his Harley sliding across asphalt, throwing sparks. The second SUV swerved toward Reynolds, but he'd seen it coming, throttled hard, and pulled ahead. The third vehicle pulled alongside the van. This wasn't surveillance. This was an attack. Break formation. Get Emma to safety. The convoy exploded into chaos. Veterans peeled off, some moving to protect the fallen Martinez, others forming shield around the van. Ryan drove like he'd trained for this, which he had evasive maneuvers learned in Ranger School, applied to Pennsylvania Highway. The SUV tried to force the van off the road. Ryan held steady, refusing to yield 2 tons of vehicle against 3 tons of armored SUV. They collided, metal shrieking, but Ryan kept control. Wolf pulled alongside his Harley, matching speed, putting himself between the SUV and the van. The SUV's window rolled down. A rifle barrel emerged. Gunwolf swerved right as the rifle fired rounds, punching through air where he'd been a heartbeat earlier. I accelerated, pulled ahead of the convoy, reaching the SUV's front quarter. The driver saw me coming, tried to compensate, but motorcycles are faster than trucks, and I'd been riding before he was born. I pulled even with the driver's window, saw his face register surprise, then fear. I veered hard right, clipped his front tire with my crash bar physics doing the rest. The SUV's front wheel caught twisted vehicle momentum, taking over. The SUV spun, crossed the center line, hit the guardrail, flipped. Behind me, the second SUV had given up on Reynolds and was pursuing the van. Ryan drove like demons, chased him, taking corners too fast, using weight and momentum the way he'd been trained. But the SUV was faster, closing distance. Elena's voice crackled over the radio. Harrisburg police inbound, ETA 5 minutes. We don't have 5 minutes. The third SUV had stopped to extract occupants from the first professional discipline, overriding target priorities. That left 1 vehicle in pursuit, 1 van trying to escape, and 14 veterans deciding whether to protect Emma or help Martinez, who lay in the road behind us. No choice, really. We'd made our decision when we put on these jackets. Williams, Washington, Henderson stay with Martinez. Everyone else with me. We converged on the remaining SUV like wolves on wounded prey. Major Reynolds pulled alongside the passenger side, his Harley steady despite 70 years of age. Sergeant Williams came from the other direction. The SUV tried to thread between us, but there wasn't space, not with veterans who'd flown combat missions and survived ambushes boxing it in. The driver made his choice, hit the brakes hard. We shot past, had to circle back. The SUV reversed, smashed into Henderson's bike, sent him sprawling. Then it was gone, accelerating in the opposite direction, abandoning the attack. We regrouped around the van. Ryan had pulled over, Emma and Blake and Rachel visible through windows but unhurt. Martinez was conscious, left leg clearly broken, but alive. Henderson had road rash and bruises, but nothing permanent. 2 bikes totaled 3 veterans injured, 1 van battered but functional. And we'd survived Victor Kane's first attempt to stop us. State police arrived 7 minutes later, found us rendering first aid and documenting damage. The detective I'd spoken with earlier emerged from an unmarked car, surveyed the scene with cop's eyes that saw too much. You folks want to tell me what happened here? We were attacked. 3 SUVs, coordinated assault, professional execution. 1 veteran down with broken leg, another with injuries. We have right to press charges. Against who? Did you get plates? Reynolds produced his phone, showed footage he'd captured during the attack. Plates clearly visible, faces partially obscured but documented. The detective made notes, called for backup, ordered roadblocks. Professional response, but I could see him calculating political angles, wondering how deep Morrison's influence ran in state police. You're still planning to attend a press conference in Harrisburg. That's the plan. I'd suggest postponing, for your safety. Postponing means Morrison has time to destroy evidence, intimidate witnesses, prepare defenses. We go today or we don't go at all. The detective studied me with eyes that had seen 30 years of crime and corruption. You're Marcus Stone, decorated Marine 3 combat tours, retired lieutenant colonel. I read your file when you called this morning. Then you know I don't bluff and I don't quit. No, but you're also 72 years old leading a convoy of senior citizens against a man with resources and connections. This isn't war, Colonel Pinto. This is Pennsylvania. We have laws, procedure systems designed to handle this properly. We've been using those systems for 6 years. They haven't worked. Morrison owns the local sheriff, half the county officials, and apparently has enough reach to order hits on public highways. Your systems failed David Carter. They're failing his daughter. So excuse me if we don't wait for bureaucracy to save us. The detective sighed, recognizing a battle he couldn't win. Ambulance loaded Martinez Henderson, refusing transport because his injuries weren't serious enough to miss what came next. Ryan inspected the van, declared it drivable despite cosmetic damage. We remounted, reformed. The convoy continued toward Harrisburg with state police escort that arrived too late, but better than nothing. Emma's voice crackled over the radio. Everyone okay? Martinez has a broken leg. Henderson scraped up. But we're still riding. Kane will try again. My father doesn't quit when he's losing. Neither do we. The convoy reached Harrisburg at 10:45, 15 minutes to spare. The Tribune offices occupied a converted warehouse downtown, brick and glass modernity wrapped in historic facade. Ashley Morgan waited on the steps, camera crew ready, other media outlets already gathering because word had spread that something significant was breaking. We dismounted in the parking lot, formed up around the van, as Emma and Blake and Rachel emerged. The veterans moved into protective positions, not aggressive but unmistakably present. Ashley approached with microphone ready, but I waved her off. Questions during the press conference. Right now we prep. Inside the conference room held 30 chairs for media, a table at the front with nameplates already positioned. Emma Carter, Blake Morrison, Rachel Carter, Marcus Stone. Ashley had done her homework, understanding that this story needed the veteran's voice alongside the victims. Elena and Wolf worked the room, ensuring security, identifying exits, assessing threats, with old soldiers' paranoia that kept people alive. Ryan positioned himself near Emma, close enough to intervene, but far enough to avoid hovering. Blake sat alone, staring at his nameplate like it accused him. Rachel stood at the window, overlooking downtown Harrisburg, this city that had failed her husband, that had allowed Morrison to operate unchallenged for 2 decades. She turned as I approached. David would have wanted to be here. He is, in everything we're about to do. She nodded, accepting comfort she didn't quite believe. I understood. The dead remained absent, no matter how much the living wanted to conjure them back. Reporters filtered in, filling chairs, testing cameras, creating the background noise of media gathering for something they sensed mattered. Pennsylvania State Police representatives took positions in the back row. Attorney General's office sent an assistant prosecutor to observe, the system slowly dragging itself into position. At exactly 1100, Ashley called the room to order. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for coming. Today we're presenting evidence of systematic corruption, fraud, and criminal negligence by Millbrook Mayor Thomas Morrison and Morrison Construction. We'll hear from victims' witnesses and someone uniquely positioned to know the truth. We'll take questions after opening statements. She gestured to me. I stood, walked to the microphone, let the cameras focus before speaking. My name is Marcus Stone. I'm a Marine veteran who served in Korea and Vietnam. I've spent the last 6 years investigating corruption by Morrison Construction that has resulted in injuries, possibly deaths, and definitely millions in fraud against Pennsylvania taxpayers. I laid out the case methodically. 47 municipal projects over 12 years. Specifications falsified. Materials substandard. Inspectors bribed. The pattern clear for anyone willing to see it. Financial records documenting Morrison's profits built on fraud. Engineering reports showing construction that didn't meet code. Then I showed them Route 16, the road where Emma Carter's accident occurred, the guardrail that failed because posts were spaced wrong and anchored shallow, the cost-cutting that saved Morrison $18,000 and cost Emma the use of her legs. Now we're going to hear from the victims. Emma wheeled to the microphone. Cameras focused on her wheelchair, first the visual that would lead every news broadcast. But she didn't let that define her. She looked into the cameras and spoke with voice that carried David Carter's steel. 2 years ago, I was a gymnast with scholarship offers from 3 universities. Then Route 16 took that future. I thought it was bad luck. Rainy night, slick road, tragic accident. But it wasn't. It was criminal negligence by a man who valued profit over safety. She detailed her accident without drama, just facts. Car hit the guardrail at 45 miles per hour. Guardrail failed. Car rolled 30 feet down an embankment. Broken back. Paralyzed from waist down. Doctors said she'd never walk again, and 2 years later, they'd been right. But worse than my injury is knowing it was preventable. The guardrail should have held. Would have held if Morrison Construction hadn't cut corners. I'm here today to put a face to that fraud. To show what happens when greed matters more than safety, she wheeled back. Blake Morrison stood, walked to the microphone like a man heading to execution. His voice shook but held. My name is Blake Morrison. Thomas Morrison is my father. And everything you've heard today is true. I've brought documents from his private files that prove systematic fraud, bribery, and falsified records. He presented the evidence, his father's handwriting damning in its casual notation of crimes. Route 16 specifications, inspector payments, financial records. And finally, the document that changed everything. This shows payments to Victor Kane, a private security consultant, $50,000 paid September 28, 1981. The notation reads D.C. Permanent Resolution. The room went silent. Blake continued, voice breaking, but words clear. David Carter died September 29, 1981. One day after this payment, he was investigating my father's construction fraud. He had a meeting scheduled with state transportation authorities. That meeting never happened because he died in a convenient accident. Blake looked directly at the cameras. My father had David Carter murdered. I can't prove it absolutely, but I'm providing everything I have to state authorities. I'm testifying under oath, and I'm asking that my father be held accountable for what he's done. He sat down, face pale, hands shaking. Rachel stood, moved to the microphone without notes or preparation. I'm Rachel Carter, David's widow, Emma's mother. For 6 years, I've carried the weight of believing my husband died in a random accident, that I was just unlucky, that life was cruel but not deliberately so. Her voice strengthened as she spoke. Today I learned different. My husband was murdered for trying to protect his community. My daughter was paralyzed because a corrupt politician wanted to make extra profit. And for 6 years, Thomas Morrison has walked free, continuing his fraud, hurting more people. She looked at the assistant prosecutor in the back row. I'm here to demand justice. For David, for Emma, for every person harmed by Morrison's greed. And I won't stop until he's held accountable. The room erupted with questions. Ashley controlled them, directing queries to appropriate people. State police representatives confirmed an active investigation. The prosecutor committed to reviewing all evidence. Media smelled blood in the water and circled accordingly. Then Ashley's phone buzzed. She checked it, looked up with expression I couldn't read. Ladies and gentlemen, I'm receiving word that Thomas Morrison has been arrested attempting to cross the Pennsylvania-Ohio border. He had a suitcase containing $300,000 in cash and false identification papers. The room exploded, reporters shouting questions, cameras swinging to capture reactions. Emma gripped her wheelchair armrest, face cycling through emotions too fast to track. Blake collapsed in his chair like strings had been cut. Rachel simply nodded acceptance of justice too long delayed, finally arriving. I felt Wolf's hand on my shoulder, heard him whisper, "We did it, Marcus. Got him. Not yet. Arrest isn't conviction. But it's a start." The press conference continued another 30 minutes, media feeding frenzy sustained by fresh blood. Ashley expertly directed traffic, making sure Emma's story remained central, that the human cost never got lost in political scandal. Finally, she called it, thanked everyone, promised follow-up information through official channels. Media filtered out slowly, reporters chasing leads, producers demanding live shots. The prosecutor approached with state police detectives, requested formal statements, promised full investigation. Professional courtesy coding what I recognized as skepticism about vigilante justice served by old men on motorcycles. Let them doubt. We had the evidence, we had witnesses, we had Thomas Morrison in custody with a suitcase of cash that screamed guilty conscience. Outside, the veterans waited beside their bikes. Martinez called from hospital, leg set and splinted, demanding updates. Henderson sported bandages, but refused to miss the aftermath. They'd earned this moment, 6 years of patient investigation, finally bearing fruit. Emma emerged from the Tribune building, Rachel pushing her wheelchair, Ryan and Blake flanking. Reporters still hovered, but state police held them back, creating space for us to regroup. What happens now? Now Morrison faces arraignment bail. Hearing probably makes bail because that's how the system works. Investigation continues. Eventually a trial. Justice moves slow, but it moves. Emma looked around at the assembled veterans, these old warriors who'd stood with her against power and corruption. How do I thank you for this? You don't. We did it for David and for you. Family doesn't need thanks. The convoy reformed for the ride back to Millbrook. Police escort, this time official recognition that we'd done something that mattered. Martinez would recover. Henderson's road rash would heal. The bikes were replaceable. What mattered was that Emma Carter had faced her father's killer in public, told her truth without flinching, and the system had finally responded. We rode through autumn afternoon leaves, brilliant against gray sky, the air cold and clean. I thought about David Carter saving 17 men at Chosin, about the debt I'd carried for 37 years, about promises made and finally kept. The debt would never be truly repaid. David had given his life trying to protect his community. All I'd done was help his daughter get justice. But it was something. It counted. We reached Millbrook as sunset painted the sky golden red. People lined the streets, watching the convoy pass, some waving, others just staring. Word had spread. Morrison arrested, daughter victorious, old veterans proving that honor still mattered. Emma's house stood dark, Rachel having stayed at the clubhouse for safety. We escorted them home, checked the property, confirmed security before departing. Emma paused at her door, looked back at the assembled motorcycles. My father would be proud of you. All of you. He'd be prouder of you. You finished what he started. She smiled, tired but genuine, disappeared inside with her mother. The veterans dispersed, heading to homes and families, carrying the satisfaction of mission accomplished. Wolf and I rode to the clubhouse, the warehouse that had been our command center, our sanctuary, our home, when regular homes felt too small. We dismounted in silence, too tired for words. Inside, I poured bourbon for both of us, sat at the oak table where Emma had learned her father's truth. Think he's watching, quote, gestured upward. If there's any justice in the universe, David Carter is somewhere knowing his daughter stood tall today. That his brothers kept their promise. That the bad guy finally lost. Wolf raised his glass. To David, may he rest easier tonight. To David and to Emma, may she find peace. We drank to the dead and the living, to promises kept and debts honored, to one last fight won by old men who refused to quit. Outside, Millbrook settled into evening. Tomorrow would bring more media attention, more investigation, more legal proceedings. Morrison would fight with everything he had left. The trial could take years. But tonight, Emma Carter slept knowing her father had been avenged. Thomas Morrison sat in a cell knowing his empire had crumbled. And 15 veterans rested knowing they'd stood for something that mattered. Sometimes that's all old warriors could ask for. One more fight, one more chance to stand for what's right. One more mission before the final ride home. We'd gotten ours, and we'd made it count.